Great fight in Vegas. Great fight. Shawn Porter stopped by Terence Crawford in round number 10. What a fight. What a fight. A great welterweight battle. A fight, you kind of expected. And it's a situation now where Terence Crawford was the better guy and he stopped him late. I mean, Shawn Porter came to fight. And that's expected when it comes to Shawn Porter. We all knew that Shawn Porter was going to come to fight. And the fight kind of went similar to the way the Errol Spence Jr. fight went, where Shawn Porter was in it for most of it. Shawn Porter was battling. Easily he could have been winning on certain people's scorecards, but ultimately, he got caught. He got caught in the 10th round by Terence Bud Crawford, and ultimately Kenny Porter, the trainer for Shawn Porter, his daddy, stopped the fight. It was good. It was definitely a solid fight for as long as it lasted. I thought it was going to go to the scorecards. I didn't think Terence Crawford was going to stop him. I didn't see that, but I know a lot of people did see that coming, and a lot of people not necessarily surprised by that happening. By the time that before the stoppage, I had Porter up 5-4. I had Shawn Porter up 5-4 in this fight before the stoppage, before round 10. But clearly after round 10, the two knockdowns, obviously Crawford was going to take it over the fight there, and it was over. But here's the thing I want to talk about. We look at the way that was stopped. Kenny Porter stopped the fight, and I'm looking at Kenny Porter's stoppage, and clearly Shawn Porter was not happy with Kenny Porter stopping that fight. And I don't think Shawn Porter wanted to stop the fight, and I don't think Shawn Porter was seriously hurt in that particular situation. Now, do I think ultimately Terence Crawford would have stopped him? Probably. But I didn't think Shawn Porter was all that hurt in that spot. I think he was frustrated and angry that he got himself in that position where he got dropped. That's what I think he was. He was frustrated and angry that he got dropped, but I didn't think Shawn Porter was done. I did think he could have kept going. Now, would he have won the fight? Probably not. 2 knockdowns, a very close fight, a lot of swing rounds. Like I said, I had Porter up 5-4, but easily I could see a situation where others may have had Crawford up in that particular spot. It was a close fight. It definitely was a close fight going into round 10. And so I thought, it could have went either way. You could have made a case for Shawn Porter. You could have made a case for Terence Bud Crawford. But ultimately, at the time of the stoppage, I thought Shawn Porter was okay to continue. Now, you look at after the fight, Kenny Porter just went off on Shawn Porter in terms of, talk about he wasn't prepared the way he wanted to prepare. He didn't do the things that he wanted him to do during training and things of that nature. So he kind of threw him under the bus in that particular situation. So you wonder going forward, what's the relationship going to be like between now Porter and his father? They're pretty close. They're pretty close. They're pretty tight. They live close to each other, across the street from each other. So they have a close bond. They have a close relationship. But at the end of the day, these are the type of situations that sometimes lead to separations. Now, if Shawn Porter isn't preparing the way Kenny Porter wants him to prepare, then maybe it's time for Shawn Porter to do his own thing. Maybe it's time for Shawn Porter to find himself a new trainer. Maybe it's time. But I didn't like the way Kenny Porter threw his son under the bus in that particular spot. I didn't like that. I didn't like it, and I didn't like the stoppage. But at the end of the day, he knows his son better than I do. That's his son. That's his seed. So he knows whether or not his son can keep going, and he knows whether or not his son was done in that particular spot. Now, again, at that point, you could argue that Shawn Porter really did not have a chance to win the fight. I haven't seen what the scorecards were at the time of the stoppage. But again, it was a close enough fight where you're saying to yourself, okay, Porter's in it. But after those 2 knockdowns, Porter doesn't have the greatest of power. So I couldn't imagine him stopping Bud late in that particular fight and coming back from those 2 knockdowns. So I can understand it from that standpoint, you being his father, Kenny Porter, and Kenny Porter saying, you know what? He doesn't have a shot at that point. So I get that. I get that. And I understand where, Kenny Porter may have been coming from, but Shawn Porter's never been stopped. This kid's never been stopped. So let's look at these scorecards now. We got the scorecards up here. Let's look at these cards and figure out where it was at before the stoppage. Going into round 9, we had a situation. Dave Moretti had it 86-85, Terence Crawford. We had Max DeLuca. He had it 87-84, Terence Crawford. And we also have Steve Weisfeld. He also had an 86-85, Terence Crawford, going into round number 10. So going into round number 10, it was clear that in terms of the scorecards, this fight pretty much was a wrap after the knockdowns, right? Because 86-85 going into round 10. So 86-85, you figure 2 knockdowns, 10-7 round. Now you're talking about a 4-round and 4-point advantage there. In terms of Max DeLuca's card, I mean, that pretty much was a wrap after those 2 knockdowns. And then there also Steve Weisfeld's cards, again, pretty much the same scenario, same situation as Dave Moretti. A close fight, but after those 2 knockdowns, Shawn Porter really didn't have a moment, a chance, or an opportunity to get back into this fight. Shawn Porter is not a guy who's going to knock you out. Shawn Porter doesn't have that type of power. So therefore, you can understand maybe why his trainer, Kenny Porter, made the decision to pull the plug. Maybe you can understand at that point why Kenny Porter said, you know what, enough's enough. You can't win this fight at this point. You don't have the power to win this fight at this point. You can't get it done. And maybe it's a situation where it's like, yo, this is my baby boy. This is my son. And he can't get it done. And the only thing that can happen is bad. The only thing that can happen from here is nothing good. Nothing good at this point could happen for Shawn Porter. According to Kenny Porter, maybe. I'm just trying to get into these guys' heads. I don't know why Kenny Porter made the decision that he made. But clearly, he did say that he felt Shawn wasn't prepared. I don't know how I feel about that, but that's the way he views it. He felt Shawn Porter wasn't prepared enough. He didn't like his preparations. He didn't like the things that he did in training camp. And he felt like Shawn was trying to do his own thing in some respect. So when a guy is trying to do his own thing in some respect, maybe it's a time for a separation. Maybe it's a time for these guys to go their separate ways. It happens. It happens in the sport where, sometimes it's time to separate. It happens in the sport where sometimes guys have to go their way. Trainers got to go here, and the fighter has to go there. This is a difficult situation because of the relationship, obviously, that the Porters have. They're very close. Shawn and Kenny are very close. And so this is a difficult one. This is a difficult one for Shawn Porter to swallow at this point. He clearly was upset. He clearly was disappointed, right? You saw it. It was written all over his face. He couldn't hide his disappointment. He couldn't hide his frustration. You saw it. You saw that Shawn Porter was not happy with that stoppage. Clearly, he wasn't happy with that stoppage. And as a fan, I wasn't happy with that stoppage. I wanted the thing to keep going. Because here's the thing about Shawn Porter, right? This dude's exciting. He's got an exciting style. And, say what you want about Shawn Porter. Yes, he's come up short against Errol Spence. Yes, he's come up short against Kell Brook. Yes, he's come up short against Terence Crawford. So when he stepped up outside of Danny Garcia, anytime he has stepped up, he's lost. But he's lost competitively. And he's fought his butt off in those particular spots. Before he got dropped by Errol Spence, he was in that fight and easily could have won that fight. Before getting dropped twice by Terence Crawford, he was in this fight. And if he could have, taken over in those championship rounds, he could have won that fight as well. So, good fight, great fight. We talk about Terence Crawford. Well, he's never fought anybody great at 147. I'm not calling Shawn Porter great, but I am going to say he's very good. So he did fight somebody that's very good in Shawn Porter, right? And he proved that, hey, Bud Crawford's going to stop you, and he stopped him. Bud Crawford did what Bud Crawford needed to do. Now, at this point in time, it's time for us, it's time for boxing to get the fight that we want out the welterweight division, and that clearly is Terence Crawford against Errol Spence Jr. That's the fight we want. That's the fight boxing needs, and that's the fight that should happen. It should happen. That's the fight that needs to happen. Enough is enough. It's time for those boys to get it on. It's time for Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. to get it on. And hopefully at some point, hopefully at some time, hopefully in some moment, those two will actually get it on. Let's look at Terence Crawford. Let's look at his box record here. His last few fights. You notice a trend here, man. TKO, 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 TKO. So the guy is stopping each and every fighter that he fights. It's at some moment, at some time, clearly, based on what we're seeing with Terence Crawford, he is going to stop you. And that's what he did against Shawn Porter. Shawn Porter has never been stopped. Shawn Porter has never been stopped. And so that makes what happened tonight even more impressive. Shawn Porter has never, ever been stopped in his career. Errol Spence Jr. couldn't do what Terence Crawford did tonight. And you wonder now, clearly we all want Crawford Spence. Spence Crawford, however you want to say it. That's what we want next. Clearly now, this could be Terence Crawford's last fight with Top Rank. And at some point he's going to be, a free agent. So as a free agent, right, he can say, you know what, let's do a one-off here, Al. Let's do a one-off, me, Errol Spence. It's a big fight. And what would have made this even bigger, right? Let's just say the WBA allowed Ugas to fight Errol Spence in a unification next year, right? And let's say Errol Spence beats Ugas. If that, let's just go with that scenario. Let's just say WBA said, you know what, Ugas, you can fight Errol Spence for unification, right? Let's just say Errol Spence and Ugas fight, and let's just say Errol Spence wins that fight and captures the WBA. At that point, a fight with Terence Crawford becomes undisputed at 147. So that fight becomes bigger. That becomes a bigger fight at this point. If Crawford and Spence are in the ring for undisputed at 147, that's huge, man. That's big time there. So maybe we can get it at some point, at some time. We saw Errol Spence there. Errol Spence didn't seem too happy, right? As soon as the fight ended, it seemed like Errol Spence was rooting for Shawn Porter. As soon as the fight ended, Errol Spence got up, walked out, and left, right? So we look at Terence Crawford at this point, 34 years old, right? So he's still in his prime, right? He's still fighting at an elite, at a high level at this point. But you do wonder, right, how long it's going to take for this fight to happen. And then you got to wonder with Errol Spence. He had the retina issue, right? He came off the big accident, the huge car accident, but he proved against Danny Garcia that he was kind of back, right? He proved against Danny Garcia that he was back. But again, if you look at it, right, it would be good. It would be great if we can get Spence and Crawford. It would be great. It would be ideal. It would be the fight that boxing wants. It would be the fight that maybe boxing needs, right? It would be that fight. It would be that good of a fight, right? It would be a 50-50 deal. This was a 60-40 deal, right? Maybe even 70-30, Terence Crawford and Shawn Porter. We kind of knew that Terence Crawford was going to win, but we also knew that Shawn Porter was going to be right there. And he was. And the thing about Shawn Porter, his fights are so hard to score. The way he fights, the football style that he has, the running in, the running out. I mean, it's a difficult fight to score. It's hard to score Shawn Porter fights. So when I look at these scorecards, I can see how someone will want to say it was Crawford winning the fight. But I also could see how someone would say that Porter was winning the fight. So I can see now how both people, whatever, side you're on, I can see how you could come up with that conclusion. I can see how you could draw the conclusion that Shawn Porter was winning the fight. I can see how you could draw the conclusion that Terence Crawford was winning the fight. It was that type of fight. But ultimately, Terence Crawford has that thing, that gene, that next level, right? Terence Crawford is next level, and he proved that. And Shawn Porter is on a certain level. It's a high level, but it's not elite level. And Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford both proved against Shawn Porter that, hey, this dude is tough. This dude will give you a tough fight. This dude won't make it easy for you. But at the end of the day, this dude is not good enough to win against an elite level fighter like a Errol Spence Jr. and like a Terence Crawford. It's that simple when it comes to Shawn Porter. Showtime, Shawn Porter. But man, this was good. This was a great night of boxing. This was a great night for Terence Crawford. So everybody that's saying, well, Terence has never fought a big-time welterweight. Shut up at this point. It's time for you to, whoever feels that way, it's time for you to shut up. Because Terence Crawford has proven that he can beat an elite level welterweight, right? He stopped Shawn Porter. That doesn't happen. No one stops Shawn Porter, right? It's never happened. So clearly, no one stops Shawn Porter. Correct. Bud is the best of the best, right? Bud is the top guy. Well, him and Errol Spence Jr., you can kind of go back and forth, but I will say this, that retina situation scares me when it comes to Errol Spence Jr. That scares me, right? We saw Sugar Ray Leonard, whose career was derailed for a period of time because of a detached retina. So the retina situation, the eye situation when it comes to Errol Spence, that's a scary proposition. Your eyes are, you can't go without your eyes, and you need your eyes. So that's a scary proposition when it comes to Errol Spence Jr. Will he be the guy that he was before the injury, before the accident? Yeah, he proved against Danny Garcia he's still that guy. But Terence Crawford and Danny Garcia are different dudes. Terence Crawford is next level. Terence Crawford, to some, is the pound-for-pound best in the sport of boxing. Terence Crawford, to some, it's the best welterweight, it's the best in boxing, it's the best in the sport, right? And clearly, he showed tonight that he is one of the best. And clearly, he showed tonight that a fight with Errol Spence Jr. would be great, would be off the charts, would be scintillating, would be sensational, would be amazing, would be the fight that we all want to see. We all want to see it. And not to repeat it, but I said this before. Imagine if the WBA allowed Ugas to fight Errol Spence Jr. next year. And then imagine that Errol Spence Jr. would have beat Ugas, right? At that point, we have an undisputed situation where Crawford and Spence would be for undisputed at 147. That's a huge fight. That is a big fight. Undisputed, all the belts. We may hate the belts, we may hate the sanctioning bodies, but at the end of the day, belts matter. Belts matter. we can hey, we hate the WBO, the WBA, WBC, and the IBF. We can hate them all. But belts matter. They matter. Make sure you take the time out, like the video. Make sure you also subscribe to the channel. So take the time out now, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. Let's do this now. Let's share the screen. We're gonna go back to the scorecards, right? So you can take a look at the scorecards at the time of the stoppage. So at the time of the stoppage, it was a close fight. Clearly, it was a close fight. It was a fight that both fighters. Shawn Porter was in. But let's look at the scorecards now. At the time of the stoppage, all right, Dave Moretti, 86-85, Terence Crawford. That was in Max DeLuca, 87-84, Terence Crawford. And then Steve Weisfeld, 86-85, Terence Crawford. So we had three guys, three cards there, all going for Terence Crawford. And again, going back to the stoppage of Kenny Porter, he might have done the right thing from this standpoint. Shawn Porter does not have big-time power. So since Shawn Porter doesn't have big-time power, you can argue that Kenny Porter did the right thing because, look, you're looking at these scorecards, right? You're talking about a 3-point round, 10-7 round at that point because Shawn Porter was dropped 3 times. So you're talking about a 10-7 round, right? So a 10-7 round makes 86-85. That makes that what? 96-92 on Moretti's card. On Weisfeld's card, DeLuca's card on a 10-7 round, that makes it 97-91. And then also, again, on Steve Weisfeld's card, that would make it a 96-92 round. So, fight card at that point. So that pretty much would have put that round, the 10th round, with the 2 knockdowns, would have put this fight away. The fight pretty much would have been a wrap. It would have been a done deal, and Terence Crawford would have won, right? So from that standpoint, I get it. I understand it. Maybe that was going through Kenny's head at that point. But we all know what Kenny said at the end, right? If you believe what Kenny Porter says in terms of Shawn Porter's preparations and things of that nature, if you believe what Kenny Porter says in that instance, in that situation, and if you believe it, then you believe it, and that's that, right? But Shawn wasn't happy. Shawn Porter was not happy with that stoppage. He was not happy with that stoppage. Clearly, he was upset by that stoppage. Clearly, he felt he should not have stopped the fight. I was shocked. I was shocked when I saw Kenny Porter on the apron because, we saw Errol Spence Jr. drop Shawn Porter. We saw Errol drop Shawn Porter, and, when he dropped him, right, you're saying to yourself, okay, he dropped him, but at the same time, right, he's still in the fight. I guess that's what Kenny's thought was at that point in time. But you look at it, right? You look at the situation, and this is different, I guess, right? I mean, Errol Spence is a guy that can stop you, is a guy that is a good finisher. Maybe Terence Crawford's a better finisher. I don't know, right? You can make that argument either way. But I will say this. Right? I will say this. I thought Porter wasn't hurt. Like, he was banging. You don't see a dude hurt banging on, right? You don't see him banging on the canvas like that, a dude that's hurt like that, right? You never see it, right? Spence did drop Porter in that fight. Broner did as well. Right, you're correct. Adrian Broner did drop him, but Errol Spence also dropped Porter in that particular fight. So yes, right, we've seen Porter get dropped, but we never really seen him seriously hurt. And I don't think in this instant he was seriously hurt. I don't. I don't think he was seriously hurt. I don't think so. I don't think he was seriously hurt. I don't think he was hurt. And I was disappointed in the stoppage. Clearly, I don't want to see anybody get hurt, but I don't think Shawn Porter was there because he was banging on the canvas, right? Banging on the canvas. If he was hurt, I don't think he's doing all that. His legs look fine, right? Everything looked fine when it came to Shawn Porter in that instance, in that situation. Everything looked fine, right? So at that point, you thought, okay, he's going to get up. He's going to keep on fighting. But that didn't happen. That didn't happen because Kenny Porter stepped on the apron, and Kenny Porter said, no mas, no more, enough is enough. It's time to end it. And again, I'm disappointed by it. And Shawn's body language tells me that he was disappointed as well. Shawn's body language was clear. Shawn Porter was like, no, I don't. What are you doing? Because he was angry, for getting dropped in that spot. He was angry. He clearly was angry, right? And he was ready to keep on going. And I know sometimes we got to save the fighter from themselves. I get it. I understand it. I have no problem with it in a lot of situations. But in this instance, I had a problem with it. I had a problem with Kenny doing what he did. I have a problem with K. Diddy, throwing in the towel. I have a problem with it. I got a problem with it. But hey, I get it. That's his son. That's what he's going to do. He's going to protect his boy from any hurt, harm, or danger. That's what he's supposed to do as a father. That is his job. That is his role as a father, to protect your children from any hurt, harm, or danger. That is his role. That is his job. That's what he's supposed to do as a daddy. Your job as a daddy is to protect your children at all costs. And maybe that's what Kenny was thinking. Let me protect my baby boy at all costs. Let me do what I got to do to keep my baby boy safe, because I know Terence Crawford is a dude that when he's ready to stop you, this dude's a big time finisher. And I don't want my son to get hurt. I want my son to keep, to be able to fight another day. I want my son to be able to fight another day. Maybe that's what he thought, right? I don't know. Shawn Porter at this point, great career, very good career, right? 34 years old. So you wonder what is next for Shawn Porter, right? I mean, he can beat anybody in a welterweight division outside of Errol Spence Jr. and outside of Terence Crawford. He can beat anybody at 147. So if Shawn Porter wanted to keep on going at age 34, he can keep on going. He's made a decent amount of money in his career. So maybe he's saying, I don't know how far I can go, or maybe I want to stop at this point. I don't think so. I think Shawn Porter is fine. I think Shawn Porter he fought well tonight. Shawn Porter fought very well tonight. Shawn Porter did a lot of things in this particular fight. And from my standpoint, again, I had him up 5-4 at the end of 9 rounds. Now, again, there was a lot of swing rounds. So if you said, no, I had it the other way around, I had it Terence Crawford 5-4, then I would say, you know what? Fine, right? But for me personally, I had Shawn Porter up 5-4 at the end of the 9th round. Going into the 10th, I had it up 5-4. I think Andre Ward had Porter up a point as well. I'm not 100% sure. I think he did have him up a point. I'm not sure about that, right? But in terms of the official scorecards, that was not the case. Shawn Porter was down on each and every scorecard. So that's that. And now Shawn Porter, we got to figure out what's next for him. And we also got to figure out what's next for Terence Bud Crawford. Look, clearly, right? We all know what's next. I mean, it's up to now the powers that be, whether Crawford, I believe this is his last fight with Top Rank in terms of his contract, right? So what he does from at this point on, he's going to be a free agent. So what does he decide to do? Does he sign with Al and PBC? Does he go back with Bob and Top Rank and ESPN? Where does he go, right? Or does he say, you know what, let me stay a free agent. I'll fight you here. I'll fight this guy here. I'll fight that guy there, right? One-off situations, one-off here, one-off there, one-off everywhere. But I will say this. He don't have a lot of time because Terence Crawford is 34 years old. He doesn't have a lot of time. At some point, his prime is not going to be his prime no more. At some point, he's going to age and get older. At some point, he's not going to be the same fighter. So time is not on the side of Terence Crawford. It's not. It's not on the side. So in terms of his decision-making, he has to decide and figure this thing out kind of quickly, right? Because he's age 34. And, you only have so many miles on your clock, your boxing clock. You only have so many miles, right? So he just turned 34 in September. So again, we figured this out. If he fights, let's just say he fights Errol Spence end of 2022, middle of 2022, or, third quarter 20 or fourth quarter 2022, he's 35 years old at that point. And if 35 years old, and at that point, we're in November now. If he fights him September, October of next year, or maybe the summer of next year, right? He would have been out of the ring almost 6, 7, 8 months. Not awful, right? So maybe it's a fight that can happen. But again, time is not on the side of Terence Bud Crawford, 34 years old. So he's got to figure that situation out. But he's still going at a high level, still a very good fighter. And it's very difficult to look good against Shawn Porter. It's very difficult to look good against Shawn Porter, as we've seen. We've seen Errol Spence not look good against Shawn Porter. We've seen Terence Bud Crawford at times not look good against Shawn Porter. So it's difficult to look good against Shawn Porter. And Shawn Porter, again, fought Keith Thurman to the end. He's, very close fight with Keith Thurman, right? Fought Errol Spence Jr. to the end. Very close fight with Errol Spence Jr. And before the stoppage here tonight against Terence Crawford, fought him to the end and fought him hard and fought him tough and was in this fight. Right? So if he, hypothetically speaking, if he wins the 10th on two of the scorecards, we have a tie going into the championship rounds. So it was, if Shawn Porter would have won that 10th round, hypothetically speaking, going into the 11th and 12th round, we have a situation now where, the fight is up for grabs. And I thought it was kind of up for grabs, and it was up for grabs. 86-85 on two of the scorecards, 2 out of the 3 scorecards. Only a scorecard where it wasn't up for grabs was Max DeLuca, where he had the 87-84. It wasn't up for grabs at that point. But all the other scorecards, it was up for grabs for Terence Crawford and Shawn Porter. It was up for grabs. But again, Terence Crawford, next level assault, next level attack, next level fighter. He's just a next level dude, right? And Shawn Porter didn't have that next level. Some fighters just don't have that next level. Terence Crawford has it. Errol Spence Jr. has it. Shawn Porter, as good as he is, does not have it. Does not have that next level. So this is a fun night, man. It's an exciting night. I will say the undercard of this fight wasn't that great. A little boring. Boring undercard for sure. Wasn't one of the better undercards. But hey, the main event lived up to, at the end of the day, you spend $70, you would like a full undercard where everything is good, everything is great. But the main event was worth the money. It was worth the $70 at the end of the day. And we got our money's worth in terms of the main event. You could have a great undercard and a stinker at the main event. You'd probably be more disappointed this way around than the way it was in terms of a stinking undercard and a very good main event. So you got your money's worth. Your $70 was spent well, and ultimately, we saw Terence Crawford prove that. Guess what? All the talk about, hey, this dude has never beaten one of the better a legit welterweight, a big time welterweight. All that talk now is just talk, because now he's proven that he can do just that. So look, there's still some, if he doesn't fight Errol Spence Jr., there's still some big fights for Terence Crawford. We'll see what happens, what he decides to do. Let's just say he goes to PBC. Let's just say he works without Heyman. You still got Keith Thurman over there, even though Keith Thurman hasn't been in the ring since 2019. So, and it doesn't look like he's obviously not getting in the ring at the rest of 2021, because we're in November at this point. So he's probably going to be out close to 3 years by the time Keith Thurman comes back. So if you're Keith Thurman, I don't know if you're Keith Thurman, if you can run right into a Terence Crawford fight after, being off for so long. Keith Thurman's 32 years old at this point. And then Keith Thurman, this is a guy who's been out of the ring for a long time. You 2 years, this going in and out and not fighting that often, it's very tough for your career. You can't keep doing that. You got to get in that ring, man. And Keith Thurman doesn't seem all that hungry, right? He doesn't seem all that hungry. He got married, and it seemed like it took away some of his hunger. I don't know, but I do remember, right? So he fought Danny Garcia, just going back to Thurman. He fought Danny Garcia in March of 2017, right? So he came back almost 2 years later against Josesito Lopez in Brooklyn. You remember Lopez had him in trouble at one point in that fight Thurman ultimately won by majority decision, but Lopez did have him in trouble. I forgot what round it was. I was at the fight. I was covering the fight, and Lopez did have him in trouble, and that was after Keith Thurman coming off almost a 2-year layoff. So that's a situation to be monitored in terms of Keith Thurman. And if you're Keith Thurman, right, you got to say, I got to get a tune-up before I can step in maybe with a Terence Crawford. That's a big fight. That's a big fight, Keith Thurman, Terence Crawford. That's a big fight. Now, I don't know if we'll get it because, again, we got to figure out Keith Thurman and his hunger. But this dude, you got to give Keith Thurman a tune-up before he steps up to fight a Terence Crawford, right? But Keith Thurman's still a name that rings bells at 147. Keith Thurman's name still rings bells at 147 pounds. So, maybe it's a situation, maybe it's a fight that can happen. Crawford, Keith Thurman at some point, sometime, some moment. I don't know. Who knows? But it would be interesting. It would be an interesting fight. I'm not saying Keith Thurman beats Crawford. I think Crawford beats Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman can't take it to the body, right? He has a hard time taking it to the body. So, and Crawford, we've seen his ability to go to the body. He landed some big-time body shots tonight against Shawn Porter. So his ability to get to the body and go to the body, second to none in a lot of ways when it comes to Terence Crawford. So that would eat up Keith Thurman's body in that particular situation. So make sure you like the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. But again, great night of boxing, right? Boxing won tonight. Boxing doesn't always win, but boxing won tonight. And Terence Bud Crawford proved and showed the world that he is maybe the best 147-pounder. Maybe he is the best fighter in boxing. Maybe he is. Maybe he is the best. Pound for pound, maybe Terence Crawford is that dude. Maybe, right? Maybe he is, right? We'll see. But, I like Keith Thurman. I'm a Keith Thurman guy, right? I like Keith Thurman. But, again, his inactivity, right? You can't be as inactive as he's been over the years, right? You can't be that guy and come back and look sharp. You got to get these fights, man. You got to get it. Like, let's go looking at his record again. So, right, he went from Lopez to Manny Pacquiao 6 months later. So again, and you just look at him, right? This dude, 2015, he fought Luis Collazo, and then almost a year later, he fights Shawn Porter, right? 9 months later, he fights Danny Garcia, hurts his elbow. 2 years later, after that, pretty much he fights Josecito Lopez, and then Manny Pacquiao in 2019, right? So, and he could have won that Manny Pacquiao fight. Got caught in that first round, right? Got him caught, and that was a close fight. But Keith Thurman came up big later in the fight, but it just wasn't enough. That knockdown hurt him, and then he also got hurt to the body later in the fight. So you get it, you understand, and it is what it is. But look, Terence Bud Crawford is a guy who's the best at this point, one of the best. I'm not going to say he's the best because there's still Errol Spence Jr. out there. But I stated before, I'm concerned about Errol Spence. I'm concerned about the eye. I'm concerned about these things. I am. I am concerned about Errol Spence and his ability to stay healthy. I'm just concerned. I'm concerned. But again, it's the fight that we all want to see. I know last night, I think Chris Mannix or was it Sergio Moore, one of them said, Demetrius Andrade and Charlo was the fight, one of the biggest fights in boxing. And that's a fight that I would love to see as well. But there's no bigger fight at this point, right, than Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. You could say Canelo against anybody else. Canelo's looking to go up to cruiserweight at this point. Something, again, in my opinion, kind of a duck, right? Because the best fighter at 168 is David Benavidez, right? That's the guy. I know he doesn't have a strap. I know he doesn't have a belt. But, man, that's a fight I would love to see. I would love to see Canelo and David Benavidez. That's a fight. Plant, that's great, sure, but he's not David Benavidez, right? He's not. and we could talk about Canelo's run at 168, and how he was able to, clean out the division to a degree at one over in the last 11 months and things of that nature. But I'm not one of these guys who's impressed by Canelo's run. I'm not. I'm not impressed by the run that Canelo had in over these 11 months. I would have been impressed if clearly once Benavidez lost the belt, the one, he lost on the scales. Once he lost the belt, 168-pound division kind of opened up for Canelo, right? He won a vacant strap, against Yildirim. I mean, it's just, I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed by what I saw in terms of Canelo and in terms of his run. I'm not impressed, man. I'm not impressed. I am not impressed by this run by Canelo Alvarez. Not, right? Do I think he's pound for pound one of the best in the sport? Clearly. I'm not taking that part away from him. He is, right? This dude is one of the best. He is maybe the best. I'm not taking that away from him. I'll never take that away from him. But one thing I will say, this run that he's had over the past few months, 11 months, is not as impressive as some are making it out to be. It's just not. But hey, it is what it is. He is one of the best. And when you're Canelo, you can do what you want. And that's just the bottom line. When you are the cash cow in the sport of boxing, you can pick and choose who you want to fight. It's just that simple. You have that power. You have that ability, right? Because anybody that wants to fight Canelo Alvarez, that's a come up. Fighting Canelo Alvarez is a come up. So, Callum Smith, again, he was able to capture the 168, capture a title there. But again, it was Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant, I mean, again, some undefeated fighters for sure. But David Benavidez, I don't know if Canelo would have been as eager to do in terms of, to go through that division the way he went through it if David Benavidez was holding a strap at 168. Just my opinion. But obviously, we might not even see him against David Benavidez because clearly Benavidez has a difficult time, getting to 168. Clearly a difficult time for him. But, we'll see what happens. But back to this fight, and back to what we saw tonight in Las Vegas. Terence Crawford has proven once again that he is one of maybe the best at 147. But clearly at this point, as we know in the sport of boxing, unfortunately, we run into situations, unfortunately, run into problems where we don't see the fights that we want to see, that we don't get the fights that we want to see. We don't get them, right? And we don't get them necessarily when we want them. And sometimes we get them when both fighters are past their prime. We would have loved to have gotten Mayweather-Pacquiao, right? After, was that 2011, 2012, around that time, right? That's the time we would love to have seen it. But clearly, it didn't happen. It happened a little later. But both guys weren't in their prime. But it wasn't the best of fights. But ultimately, we got it, right? It wasn't a mythical matchup. But you get concerned sometimes because, guys, Terence Crawford's going to be 35 next year, right? 34 at this point. He's not getting younger. He's getting older. So at some point, we would hope that Spence and Crawford can get it on before it becomes a mythical matchup, before it becomes a matchup that, it's imaginary. It's something we just think about. Oh, I wonder what would have happened if Terence Crawford would have fought Errol Spence Jr. I always wonder what would have happened, right? And it could turn into that point, right? Or you might have to say, I wonder what would have happened if Crawford and Spence were both in their primes and they fought, right? So it's boxing, right? I love the sport. Clearly, a lot of us love the sport, right? It's a great sport, but man, it just has those moments, those times, those situations where you don't get what you want. And it's politics after politics after politics. So that's boxing. I love the sport. A lot of you love the sport, but clearly it has its issues. It has its problems. So that's that. But going forward, we hope that's the fight. That's the fight to be made at this point. Terence Crawford, Errol Spence Jr. make the fight. Whether Crawford decides to stay with Bob Arum in Top Rank, whether Crawford decides to go and go to PBC and fight with Al and Al Heyman. They could figure something out in terms of that fight. I don't know. But Terence Crawford, Errol Spence Jr. is the biggest fight in boxing. Is the best fight in boxing, and it's the fight that needs to be made at this point, at this time. Great night of boxing. Great main event, I should say, because the rest of the night wasn't that great. The undercard wasn't that great. But man, that main event was something special. That main event was fun. That main event was exciting. And that main event is what we all asked for and is why we paid our $70. Now, we've got some other pay-per-views coming up. I know Tank Davis, Cruz. I'm not going to buy the fight, but it is. I would have been more interested with Rolly, to be honest with you, but I understand why they took Rolly out of the fight. I get it. Has some accusations out there, so I get it. I understand, but that's the fight I would have liked to have seen. I might have bought it if Rolly would have stayed in, but who knows, right? Who cares? That's that. But the fight tonight was special. The fight tonight was special. This fight tonight was good, and the fight tonight is what we wanted. We got a big-time fight. We got some drama. We got some intrigue. We got some excitement. We got some back-and-forth action. We got everything that we wanted. We got everything that we wanted tonight, right? We got everything that we wanted. So we can't complain. We can't get mad. We can't get angry. We got everything that we wanted tonight. We got a competitive fight. We got a compelling fight. And we got a fight that was on the table going into the championship rounds. We got a fight that was up in the air going into the championship rounds. We got all that tonight. We got it all. And, ultimately, Kenny Porter saw enough. Ultimately, Kenny Porter said, you know what? I'm going to stop this fight. I don't want my guy, my son, my baby boy to get hurt. So at this point, I'm going to stop the fight. Shawn didn't have enough. Shawn didn't have it tonight. Shawn couldn't get it done. And ultimately, based on the way the scorecards were, he's right. Based on what we saw scorecard-wise, he's right. He's clearly right. In that instance, based on the scorecards, he's right. Again, let's put those scorecards up one more time. Based on the scorecards, he is right. Again, going into the 10th round, Porter was down on all three cards, down by one on two cards, down by three on another. Again, a 10-7 round on Dave Moretti's card because he was two knockdowns there. So a 10-7 round would have made it 96-92 at that point, in terms of and at that point, 96-92 with 11-12, 2 rounds left, Shawn Porter would have needed a knockout. Shawn Porter would have needed a knockout in those situations, in that spot. And so he would need a knockdown in those spots. And Shawn Porter is not a guy who's a big puncher. Shawn Porter is just not a big puncher. He's not, right? He mauls you, he gets all over you, but he's not a big puncher. And, 34 wins, but only 17 KOs. He's not a big puncher. Shawn Porter is not a big puncher. And his pops knows better than anybody, right? He's not a good puncher. And in fact, his last TKO was in 2017 against Andre Berto. So 2017 was the last time Shawn Porter has gotten a stoppage. 2017 was his last time. So, clearly at that point, based off of that, it would have been difficult for him to win this fight. We just knowing his history, it would have been difficult for him to win this fight. So last TKO, right? 2017. It's almost what? That's over 4 years ago. That's almost 4 years ago. So Porter clearly is not a guy with concussive power. Is not a guy who is a one-punch knockout artist. He's not that dude. Shawn Porter is not that guy. So again, at that point, with those two knockdowns in the 10-7 round, based on the scorecards where he's down by one on two and down by three on another, based on all that we saw there, Shawn Porter was pretty much, he needed a knockout at that point to win. So, and again, based off of that, based off of that, it would have been difficult for him to. He probably would not have won because he would have needed a knockout. And so, and that again, 2017 was the last time he got TKO against Andre Berto. So it wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't. So that's that. Terence Crawford is the man at 147. Terence Crawford has proven, has shown that he is the guy that, him and Errol Spence are the top two welterweights at 147. It's time for those guys to fight. It's time for the powers that be to make the fight. It's a big fight. It's a huge fight. And as I said earlier, I wish that the WBA would allow Ugas to fight Errol Spence in February. I wish the WBA would let that happen, or whatever Errol Spence is expected to come back in 2022. I wish they would have let that happen, because if they let that happen, then Crawford and Spence could be an undisputed situation at 147. Man, that makes the fight even bigger. That makes the fight large, man. Wow. Undisputed. Two of the top guys in the sport. Clearly two of the top guys in the division. That would be an exciting proposition. And that would be something that I think we all, as fans, would have liked to have seen. An undisputed situation, Spence and Crawford. I mean, I'm not saying the fight's not going to happen, but I'm definitely not going to say the fight is going to happen, because you know boxing politics and you know how things work, you know how things go. But hey, let's pressure all the people that we need to pressure. Let's do what we got to do, and try to get this fight to happen. Let's all put pressure on the powers that be and say we want the fight, and hopefully we can get the fight. But it may not come when we want it. And that's just the reality of the situation. It may not come when we want it. It may not come, it may not come at all. That's just also the reality of the situation. It may not come at all. Be prepared, right? We look at the history of boxing. Riddick Bowe and Lennox Lewis never happened, right? Lennox Lewis and Riddick Bowe never happened. Mythical matchup. It's a fight that we all wanted to see, but it never happened, never came to fruition. That's that. That's the reality. It happens, right? We wanted to see Mayweather and Pacquiao in their primes. Didn't happen. Joshua Wilder, Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder, right? That was a fight that both guys were undefeated. That would have been a huge fight. I think it was Wilder beat Ortiz and Joshua beat Klitschko. At that moment, at that time, that was the time to make the fight, right? Both of them coming off their biggest wins. That would have been the time to make Wilder, Joshua Wilder. That would have been that time to make it. That would have been the perfect time to make that fight. But now, ultimately Joshua lost to Ruiz, right? And then ultimately Wilder lost to Fury twice. And then Joshua just lost to Usyk. And so maybe we could still get the fight, and it still would be a big fight, but it would not have been, it's probably not going to be as big as it could have been when both fighters were undefeated. Both fighters had O's. Both fighters had their O. And so that would have been the time, the moment, the situation to make Wilder Joshua. So now we run into the same situation with Crawford. I'm not going to say we run into the same situation, but it's a possibility we can run into a situation where we don't see Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. We could run into that situation. That's just reality. So prepare yourself, boxing fans. Prepare yourself for the possibility of not getting that fight. Prepare yourself for the possibility of being frustrated, angry, upset that you didn't get to see the fight that you wanted to see in terms of Crawford and Spence. Prepare yourself, because there's a good chance that we might see it. Might not see it, and a good chance we could see it. There's money to be made there. And so hopefully both sides will figure out there's money to be made there, and maybe Crawford will be on the same street. We talk about sides of the street. Maybe Crawford will be on the quote-unquote right side of the street to make the Spence-Crawford fight. right? Maybe. Or maybe they won't. Who knows? But all I know is at the end of the day today, we got a good fight, great fight tonight. Terence Crawford, Shawn Porter, Terence Crawford, got it done. And Terence Crawford, ultimately is the man, one of the men at 147. But yeah, you're right. Maybe we'll see it. Maybe we won't. But again, it's still it's up to the powers that be, and we'll see if the powers that be can figure this out and get the fight that we want. I mean, it's clear. There's no other fights at 147 to be made outside of this fight. Manny Pacquiao's gone, right? He's retired. He's going to be the president, trying to be president of the Philippines. So it's really the top two dudes at 147. Ugas, he's there. But in terms of popularity, in terms of the top two guys in the sport of boxing at 147, it's clear it's Terence Crawford. It's clear it's Errol Spence Jr. And it's clear, if it hasn't been clear now, it is clear as day at this point that those two need to get in the ring. And so it's clear. It's clear. We said, everybody was saying, again, Terence Crawford, who has he fought at 147? It's time for him to get tested at 147. And so he fought Shawn Porter, who tests everybody. He fought Shawn Porter, who's not an easy out for anybody. He fought Shawn Porter, who gave Errol Spence fits and was in that fight until he got dropped. Ultimately, he finished the fight, but he couldn't get it done. Lost by decision. So he gave Errol Spence Jr. fits, and he gave Terence Crawford fits. But ultimately, he couldn't go to that next level. That's it. He couldn't go to the next level. So the point is, we asked over and over, who has Terence Crawford fought at 147? Who has he fought at the welterweight division? That's what the question was before tonight. And this dude did something that Errol Spence couldn't do. Actually, he did something nobody has done, and that is stop Shawn Porter. Showtime, Shawn Porter. Showtime, right? He stopped him. So it's clear. It's clear. It's clear. It's clear. It's clear as day. If you had questions now, I don't think you have questions no more. You know the fight that you want to see at 147. We all know the fight that we want to see at 147. The question is, will we get it? That's the question at this point. This fight's over. Terence Crawford did what he had to do. Terence Crawford stopped Shawn Porter. This fight's over. Done. Nothing to say here. Manny Pacquiao's out the way. Manny Pacquiao's retired. So the two biggest names at the welterweight division, right, is Shawn Porter and Errol Spence Jr. That's the names. You got Boots Ennis coming up, right? But he doesn't have a belt. He doesn't have a strap. But in terms of the two biggest names at 147, the biggest names, it comes down to Terence Crawford. It comes down to Errol Spence Jr. That's it. That's the names. So there's nowhere to go here, fellas. Everybody out there, there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go. The only place to go is to get those two boys in the ring sometime in 2022, because Terence Crawford is going to be 35 years old September of 2022. So he's getting older. So it's time to make the fight. It's time for Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. to figure this thing out. Fellas, you're going to make your biggest money in that particular fight. Ain't no Manny Pacquiao money out here no more. So the biggest money to be had by you two is for you guys to fight. That's the biggest fight in terms of money. And it's the biggest fight in boxing at this point, as far as I'm concerned. Right? It's the biggest fight. It's the biggest fight that can be made in the sport of boxing. That's the fight. So if we, in terms of money, it's the biggest money fight out there for those two. I'm not going to say biggest money fight out there because you got Canelo Alvarez, who's the cash cow in the sport. But this is the biggest fight that can be made at 147 and probably the biggest fight in boxing. So clearly, if Al Heyman and Terence Crawford and Errol Spence and all the powers that be can sit down and figure this thing out. Bob Arum, maybe he's in the mix at that point. Who knows? Because Terence Crawford is going to be a free agent pretty much at that point in time. So not unless he decides to sign with Bob. If he signs with Bob, still with Top Rank, PPC, figure it out. ESPN, Fox, or Showtime, figure it out. Come together. Let's get a big time pay-per-view. They could do a big number. I think they could do a big number. Not going to say, Canelo reportedly got 800,000 Canelo planned. I'm not saying that kind of number. I don't know. Maybe. Who knows? Right? If marketed correctly, if marketed right, maybe. But this is the fight to be made. Terence Crawford has answered all your questions in terms of fighting and beating a legitimate welterweight. Errol Spence obviously has answered all those questions in terms of fighting and beating legitimate welterweights. All those questions have been answered, right? We all know, based on what we see, who are the two best welterweights. We see it. It's clear. We saw it tonight. We saw it on other nights. Now it's time to make it happen. So that's it. That's it. Shawn Porter, Terence Crawford. It's a fight. Shawn Porter, Terence Crawford, that was a big fight tonight. And Crawford proved that he's legitimate at 147, even though we all knew he was legit, even though we all knew he was big time. But he proved it. He beat a legitimate welterweight. So now we can all shut up in terms of that. But now it's time for Errol Spence and Crawford to get it on. And let's get it on sometime in 2022. We can't let it go. I don't think we can let it go past 2022, right? Because at that point, Terence Crawford will be 35 years old and getting older. So I don't think we can let it go past 2022. Boxing, they love to marinate. They love to marinate some things. Sometimes you marinate things too long and it burns. And then it just becomes not good. You can't use it. It's done. You can't even use it. It's not usable because you burnt it. So sometimes that's what happens in boxing. They over-marinate stuff. And then the flavor isn't that good. It doesn't taste as good as it could have. It doesn't taste as good as it should have. Right? Doesn't. That's just what happens in the sport of boxing. We over-marinate. And so we might over-marinate in this particular situation. If it goes past 2022, we are over-marinating in this fight. If we don't get Crawford and Spence in 2022, it's an over-marination at this point, and we burnt the food, and the food is no good. It's not no good, but it's not as good as it could have been, right? It's not no good. It still tastes good. It still tastes all right, but it still tastes all right, but it don't taste great, right? As it should, as it could. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if it gets in, if they can make this happen. Again, Errol Spence was there at the fight tonight. He didn't look too happy. He got up and left, right? As soon as the fight ended,